In order to successfully enter medical school, you need to be a great organizer and planner. You should be putting a lot of thought into picking your classes for each semester and thinking hard about how many units you can handle each semester to achieve a high GPA. We realize that in college, a lot of students are involved in community programs, committees, volunteer experiences, research, and maybe even have a job, all of which may require you to take less units each semester. The truth is, whether it's right or wrong, the GPA is king or queen, and a high GPA with a light course load will be so much more beneficial to you when applying to medical school versus a lower GPA and a heavier course load with more challenging classes. To understand this, let us give you some insight in how the application process works. Some schools may receive more than 10,000 primary applications for each cycle. This includes your transcripts with GPA, MCAT scores, personal statement, information about research and volunteer experiences, as well as your letters of recommendation. Sorting through 10,000 applications is nearly impossible, so schools rely on some method of screening, usually by GPA, MCAT, experiences, letter of recommendations, or a combination of these. This can potentially decrease the initial set of applications by up to 50%. These students are then invited to submit a secondary application within a certain time period. In some cases, schools send secondary applications to all students and apply screening measures after the secondary application and fees are submitted. The secondary application primarily involves additional essays on assigned topics for that particular school. Once those secondary applications are submitted, a team of coordinators review the applications superficially for completeness and quality checks, not for content, and then assign the applicant to an admission officer. At most medical schools, each application is reviewed by 2 admission officers, and a decision is made to reject, offer an interview, or hold the application after the first round of interviews is sent out. If the 2 officers disagree, there is typically a third person that also reviews the application to serve as the tiebreaker. So, realize that admission committee officers are usually doctors that have busy clinical practices and responsibilities teaching resident physicians. It is not uncommon for an admission officer to spend less than just a few minutes reviewing your entire application that you spend a good portion of your adult life perfecting. And in those few minutes, they decide your fate. The important thing to appreciate here is that there are just too many applicants to go through, even with computer screening measures removing applicants with a lower GPA or MCAT score. So, a mental shortcut that most committee members use is to first make sure most prerequisites are done at the graduating institution. And if so, they then categorize the student as a strong academic applicant, average academic applicant, or a weak academic applicant, strictly based on the GPA. This often serves as the first checkpoint in the mind of the admissions officer. Some admissions officers may even stop reviewing the remainder of the application if they don't feel the student is capable of passing medical school classes. This is not a popular thing to say, but it's true, because again, committee members are humans, not robots, and we need to use mental shortcuts in order to get through the hundreds of applications we are responsible for. It is also not an unreasonable way to categorize applicants from the get-go, because the GPA is supposed to measure the applicant's academic performance, on average, across the previous 4 to 6 years during college. Now, a very small minority of admissions officers will then proceed to analyze how many units you took each semester, and if they do find your course load was pretty light, this is very unlikely to significantly change their initial perception of your academic capabilities. So, if you need to take less units each semester to ensure a more consistent and higher academic performance, then you should absolutely do this, because a lighter course load is likely not going to have a deleterious effect in the eyes of the admissions committee. Most schools will not say this publicly. Next, an even smaller number of admissions officers will then go on to judge the difficulty of the individual courses you took. But this happens so infrequently because while admissions committee members usually know the general difficulty of a particular school, the individual classes are not something we can realistically keep track of. The only way an admission officer would be able to gauge the difficulty of a course is if they try to look at the school's website or call the school, something they are highly unlikely to do. So, if you have the option to take a more challenging course with a professor that fails 90% of the class versus an easier course with a professor that gives out A's to everyone, it would be foolish to take the former class and risk hurting your GPA. However, do make sure that the course fulfills the prerequisites for the medical schools you will be applying to, and a list of the prerequisites for medical school are listed in the course material. Once the admission officer decides that you are a strong academic applicant, they will then move on to judge your experiences, research endeavors, if any, and your letters of recommendation. Similarly, a lot of thought should be put into deciding on your major. You can get into medical school with any major you want, from molecular biology to physics to English, and even a basket weaving major. Your major does not matter as long as you chose something you are passionate about and something that you like enough that you will be able to maintain a high GPA while taking the classes for that particular major. A list of all possible majors you can take in college are included in the course material. It is important to note that we do not want our medical schools filled with the same types of students. We want a diverse incoming class with a variety of interests outside of medicine. This creates a collaborative environment in which people with many different backgrounds can tackle important issues in medicine and public health. Again, we want to make it very clear, the major you choose does not negatively or positively impact your application. However, your GPA does. So when choosing a major, make sure you choose a major you feel would allow you to achieve a high GPA in. And that is because there's unfortunately not a lot of leniency when it comes to a poor GPA and medical school admissions. Before we talk numbers, I want you to first understand that medical schools using the GPA to screen applicants is actually a protective measure for you, the applicant. Medical school tuition is expensive. Moving to a new city to start medical school is expensive, and medical school supplies and books are also expensive. Choosing a student to start medical school that may not be prepared to handle the workload risks that student from failing out from medical school, which would subject the student to loans that they may have a problem paying back, which can put them in financial hardship, ruin their credit, and strain relationships. These are stressors we do not want to put on you. So, for admissions officers, one of the most important questions to ask before offering an interview to the applicant is, can the applicant handle the workload in medical school? Because it would be terrible for the medical school, and more so for the applicant, to accept a student into medical school that may end up failing. We have all heard of applicants with a 2.7 GPA that end up making it into medical school. But please realize that this is the exception, and most of the 168 people with a 2.6 to 2.79 GPA that got into medical school in last year's cycle had incredible, unique life stories, along with evidence that they can handle the academic workload, none of which is readily available on any of the publications put out by the Association of American Medical Colleges. Here's a real-life example from an applicant we reviewed that was accepted to medical school a number of years ago. The applicant started college soon after high school with little direction on which career path they were going to take. This applicant was not considering medical school at the time, but was instead interested in community outreach programs, where they helped provide alternative healthy eating options to children of the community who were at risk for obesity and diabetes. This passion coalesced into a nonprofit organization that this applicant founded, which paired donations from local businesses to a food drive, which was then provided to the community free of charge. This took about 8 years of the applicant's life, and through this process, the applicant realized they wanted to help on a larger scale, primarily with a public health focus, and thought medical school was the right choice to help them accomplish that. The applicant enrolled in a post-bac program and took all prerequisites for medical school and earned a nearly 4.0 GPA with rigorous scientific courses over a course of 2 years. However, because of this applicant's poor performance in college classes from more than 8 years prior, this applicant's total GPA remained below 3.0. This applicant had several publications, had other leadership positions, and strong letters of recommendations, all suggesting that this applicant was an exceptional person with amazing qualities that would benefit the medical school the incoming class, and the community. In addition, this applicant demonstrated that they would be able to handle the academic workload in medical school with a near 4.0 GPA while doing a post-baccalaureate program. So, while it's possible that a student with a 2.7 cumulative GPA can make it into medical school, it will only happen if there's a minimum of 2 years with mainly science and math classes, preferably prerequisite classes or higher-level science and math courses in which the student consistently earns around a 3.8 GPA or higher each semester, coupled with a high MCAT score and rich unique life experiences that will complement an incoming medical school class. So let's look at some of the specifics. In 2019, the mean non-science GPA for all applicants applying to medical school was 3.72, and the mean science GPA was 3.45, and the total mean GPA was 3.58. These numbers have increased each year for the past 3 cycles. When looking at just applicants accepted into medical school, the mean non-science GPA was 3.81, and the mean science GPA was 3.66, with a total mean GPA of 3.73. These statistics again demonstrate that the GPA is essential, and the only way you can get around a low GPA is if you have 2 years where you're able to consistently perform at a high academic level, which means you're able to obtain an A in almost all of your classes. Other than this one exception, a poor GPA is generally not negotiable. At most medical schools, a 2.7 GPA would not even make it to the desk of an admission officer to review the application. It would get screened out, and the only way that application would get reviewed is if someone makes a call or sends an email on the applicant's behalf, urging the dean or assistant dean to consider that particular applicant. So use this as another checkpoint for yourself. If your GPA is poor and you do not have a 2-year stretch in which you were able to achieve a 3.8 or higher GPA during that time, or you are not willing to take on a 2-year stretch in which you will maintain a high GPA, medical school admission is highly unlikely and a poor journey to embark on. What we often advise students is their goal should be at least a 3.5 cumulative GPA. That is a high enough GPA to convince most admissions committees that you will be able to handle the workload of medical school. Additionally, most, if not all, medical schools use a screening cutoff for GPA. For example, a GPA cutoff anywhere between 3.2 to 3.6 has been used by the various schools we've been involved in as admission committee members. So, here's another piece of insight that can help you get through your classes. And that is, the high GPA requirement should be treated like an obstacle course. Realize that the information or content you learn in the prerequisite classes, such as physics or calculus, have little practical applicability to the real-world everyday life of a physician. Let me explain something most of you probably don't know. If your physics class was filled with doctors that have completed their training and have been in practice for many years, they most likely will fail the course, unless they put in the time and study the same way you would. So, it's not the content from these classes that you build upon during your time in medical school. Instead, it's the problem-solving skills, time management, organization, and dedication to learn the material in a finite amount of time to perform well on the class's exams that will translate into being a good doctor. And that's why we require prerequisites to be taken during college, in addition to the classes required for your degree and major to get into medical school. These prerequisite classes will test these skills, and those that do well in these classes and are able to maintain a high GPA have refined these skills, which they will need to survive medical school and be a great doctor. So, when you're in the library preparing for that organic chemistry class, keep telling yourself that this is one of the many hoops you need to jump through to get into medical school. Most doctors don't have a passion or love for organic chemistry or physics, but it's something we all have to do, and do well, as the organization, planning, and studying required to ace that organic chemistry exam is what you need to be a great doctor. So, now that you know why the GPA is one of the most important metrics in deciding if a student is an appropriate candidate for medical school, let's move on to how you can maintain a high GPA.